Happy Monday morning, people. Let's get the week started right with some Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday and Wednesday and Friday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and as you all know by now, this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. Yes, you there wondering if you're a human on the outside, but a gnome on the inside. Countdown to Classic spends the next 90 minutes or so hearing your expert opinion on the hot button issues surrounding the impending release of the sure-to-be amazing World of Warcraft Classic. If you hear anything on the show that you would like to comment on, then check countdowntoclassic.com for all the social links or email feedback@countdowntoclassic.com with your reactions or memory lane or anger management submissions. If you would like your quick WoW Classic takes or questions featured on the show, then please do contact me and call in. From about 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time onwards on Friday and Saturday nights, I take calls, and you can join in on Countdown to Classic's pre-recorded talkback radio sessions. For the show's European listeners, I'm also happy to take calls from about 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. in your area of the world any day of the week. Either email feedback@countdowntoclassic.com or join the show's amazing Discord channel via the link in the show notes and reach out to me there. There will be more shout outs and show news towards the end of the show, so please do stick around to possibly hear me throw you some love and give you updates on what's to come this week on the show. But for now, let's get to the news and discussions of the week with this week's Forum and Fauna. Every Monday over here at Countdown to Classic, we break down the news and forum posts that have come to my attention throughout the week that I feel that you should hear about in relation to what's coming with World of Warcraft Classic. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have breaking news over at the Countdown to Classic News Center. It seems that Blizzard has officially commented on Classic World of Warcraft by not saying anything at all. Okay, I'm sorry for the brief tease there. I hope none of you had a heart palpitation, but it's actually true. We did finally get our first sighting of some blue text over on the official forums, with this out-of-nowhere response to a random customer support post on the official forums. And they said the following: outside of what was announced at BlizzCon in 2017, there is no other information available at this time. We have no definitive time frame. The production director for World of Warcraft, J. Allen Brack, stated at the time that this is a fairly big endeavor. Right now, we have very little information to share outside of it is a project that is being worked on. Any new information will likely be posted on our main site and in the Classic discussion forum, so I would keep an eye on those. I imagine the Warcraft Twitter handle will probably mention something as well when the time comes. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is like hearing the voice of God. We finally got them to say something. Or at least it was a community manager, a support forum agent named Vrakthrus who gave us that information. And I know it wasn't really information, but hey, it was something. Now I realize that's a letdown and a bit of a non-event for many of us, but for some it was a bit of a cathartic moment with Blizzard at least saying something. And saying nothing has changed is good enough for some people. Like our slightly odd friend who I mentioned a few weeks back on the show who wanted weekly "we have no news for you" updates. But any kind of official word will always lead the news here over at Countdown to Classic. So I figured I'd let you know if you hadn't heard already through the grapevine. But who am I kidding? Of course you knew that. I know my listeners. Anyway, on to the real first item of this week's Forum and Fauna, as I found this post on the WoW Classic subreddit put up by user Nitty Scott that certainly piqued my interest, titled, "Does anyone play Classic for Immersion?" And Nitty Scott went on to say, I'm wondering how many people feel this way. Modern World of Warcraft is so loud and nonsensical, warping you between points in time and places in space without any sense of continuity or internal consistency. My action bar lights up with noisy spell procs and NPCs yell at me to redo a world quest for the umpteenth time. Zones are tightly packed with player attractions and traveling the world is trivial. Classic is a calm, patient game. When I think of Classic, I reminisce about quiet nights grinding in some countryside, or joining a stranger for a lengthy questline and gaining a friend. When I think of Retail, I think of breakneck gameplay, trying to perfect my complicated class rotation to complete the dungeon that much faster. I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is, but Retail feels so childish, unbelievable. I've never tired of Classic after all these years because Classic sucks me into the world and appeals to my love for fiction. By comparison, Retail feels like a parody. Who else plays for the quest text, the music, the landscapes, the cities, and the sense of immersion? So this post goes into a topic that fires up a fair bit of emotion amongst many players. Exactly how immersive was World of Warcraft? Did Blizzard do enough to easily take us away from the real world and allow us to escape to an expertly crafted fantasy one? Or did they fail to an extent and have you not playing in order to be immersed? As we do here on Countdown to Classic, I'll be presenting both sides of the argument, and those two sides would be, 1, yes, I play for immersion. How could you not in one of the most immersive virtual worlds of our time? Or 2, no, I did not play for the purposes of immersion, either due to a failure on Blizzard's behalf or my own inability to give in to the world I was presented with. So in arguing for both sides, I present forum posts to bolster the arguments as I go into bat strenuously for both sides. And the first post is for the pro-immersion crowd, with this offering from Pringle's Prize Pool, who says this: it's immersive, yeah. The atmosphere is one of the main characters of the game, almost like Diablo 1 and 2 in that way. I have to say though, currently this is the furthest I've ever gotten in classic World of Warcraft. I've only now just dinged 40 on a Fury spec, and the rotation/kit is now taking more and more of the spotlight. WoW captivated me as a kid, almost entirely through atmosphere and the sheer scale of the experience. The actual gameplay mechanics weren't necessarily what drove it. Playing Warrior 15 odd years later has flipped that on its head, and I don't even have my full kit yet. God only knows what awaits with 5 points into tactical mastery. Immersion and atmosphere are what got me into the game as a kid and made me come back. But popping whirlwind on fat mobs or hitting clutch intercepts on casters in the Fiesta shit show known as Stranglethorn Vale is what's driving my calm and patient gameplay experience at the moment. Lol. Solid fucking game, that World of Warcraft. And this point immediately kicks off with something that has become somewhat of a trope of characterization and could have you sounding a bit like a broken record if delivered in the wrong fashion. But I don't believe this user has committed that particular sin, as they raise the following point. The world of Azeroth is a character in and of itself. How could one ignore the fact that the Blizzard developers have done nothing but bring a fantasy world to life by the exceptional attention to detail paid to the environment with which players interact at every moment of their time in World of Warcraft? From the sights when one stands at a high peak of Dunmoreau and takes in the landscape, to the sounds of walking through Elwyn Forest on a sunny afternoon, and the feeling of success when you rid the world of the evils of Hogger. These are all senses that help the player feel the experience of adventuring through Azeroth, as opposed to simply being a person in their underwear watching and hitting a chocolate-stained keyboard like mine is. And the best is yet to come for this poster. They've only just dinged 40 and taken in arguably a minority of the content. And as the user suggests, many of us are coming to WoW Classic 14 to 15 years older than we were back in the day. How will that affect our starry eyes when we go through this world again? Were we more open to being open-mouthed and astonished at a young age, or do we appreciate different things when we're more mature and still have the same reaction? Maybe this time you'll appreciate the fine detail in the plant life at Stranglethorn Vale, as you're being stun-locked by an opposing faction rogue. Wow, I'm so caught up in how beautiful that bush looks, I don't even care that I have 2 knives sticking out of my ass right now. But that's the thing that this user ends on. Despite the fact that we are constantly surrounded by mayhem and war in the World of Warcraft, there still manages to be a quiet beauty to it all, whether that's delivered by a masterful soundtrack or taking in the scenery while on a long-haul run for a quest. It's the quieter, more ambient moments that truly allow this world to show us what it has to offer. But we move on to the anti-immersionists with this post from user VNex. It will never be that immersive as it was in 2004. We have YouTube and Wowhead now. RIP old games. And that point may ring in an unwanted truth for many of us rabidly waiting on World of Warcraft Classic. The past is exactly that. The past. You can never capture that first moment you logged into the game ever again. When one chases the dragon that is the high of World of Warcraft vanilla, you have to realize that you'll never catch it. That first time will always be the best in terms of awe and wonder. When we logged in for the first time in 2004 or 2005 or 2006 in vanilla, we didn't have the plethora of material that we have at our beck and call now. Videos and in-depth information were somewhat few and far between. All we had was the actual in-game experience to draw upon if we wanted to see or experience things for the first time. Now I can log on to YouTube, type in Molten Core Run, and have 44,600 results come back to me. I didn't get to Molten Core in vanilla, but I certainly feel like I've seen all it has to offer now. This library of information has been a blessing and a curse. Rather than pushing ourselves to get better if we want to see this content, we can activate cheat mode by typing in youtube.com and getting our hit there if we so choose. This has ironically killed the very world that the videos are actually trying to promote. I'm sure many of these videos were created as guides or highlights to direct people what to do when they get there, or things to look out for. However, now that I've seen it, why do I need to go there? Well, gear, I guess, and progression, and I guess it would just be kind of cool to experience it for the first time. But the post is quite right. I'm certainly guilty of venturing online to watch footage of old beloved games rather than just firing up an emulator and playing them myself. I'm so familiar with them now that I feel comfortable just watching them like a movie rather than doing what I'm supposed to be doing, playing the damn things. You think when you log into World of Warcraft Classic, you're going to be hit with a wave of emotion, just like that first time. But unfortunately, just like the first time you had sex, it's all going to end very quickly. You will realize that you know what's waiting at the end of that kobold mine, you'll know what the next quest in the quest chain is, and what reward you're going to get for it, and you'll know exactly how to take down each and every boss without having to figure it out and earn a sense of achievement. We can't jump in a DeLorean and go back in time to enjoy vanilla World of Warcraft again and have our mothers grope us. That's a Back to the Future reference there, people. That would sound very odd, actually, if you didn't pick up on that, I now realize. But I digress. The days of immersion are sadly gone. However, the immersionists strike back with this post from Big Hero 6 Yao, who says, "A part of me definitely does play for immersion. This comes out when all I do is hang around in Ironforge and talk to people or just people watch. Same when I'm questing and I'm not in a rush to speed level. I just appreciate what's around me. One of my favorite memories in Classic, and still in World of Warcraft in general, is when Christmas comes around. It's snowing outside, and all you do is get lost in the world doing whatever you may do. The decorations in-game just make it that much better. Also, the music is very good. There's still a ton of tracks that when I listen to them, they evoke memories from when I played. The rest of the game I play because of the PvP and content though. I suppose I can get immersed while I PvP, but it's more due to the gameplay instead of the world, if that makes sense. And that post raises this point. Of course I play for immersion. In fact, you actually can't avoid it even if you tried. The immersion in World of Warcraft is so easy to fall into that you don't even have to be doing anything in order to become immersed in the world. Chilling in a major city, watching the world go by, you're immersed. Doing a dance while waiting outside an instance for the rest of your group, you're immersed. Chatting a lot in Baron's chat, you're a racist. Sorry, I mean, you're immersed. I kid, obviously, people. But I have seen some pretty awful things in Baron's chat, as I'm sure many of us have. But seriously, Blizzard went so far out of their way to make Azeroth feel like a home away from home. They even changed the seasons for us and gave us in-season content. Snowballs, anyone? Bringing the distraction of real life into our virtual lives was just another brilliant known marketing tactic employed by Blizzard to have us never have to leave Azeroth. Why go celebrate Christmas with our real family when we can do it online with our virtual one? At least the virtual one doesn't fall asleep in the lazy boy and fart up the joint all night. We move back to the anti-immersion crowd with this offering from Oven Cheese 5000, who says, while immersion is greater in Classic, it's still far from the immersion available in single-player RPGs. You're seeing a certain dude get killed, wait at the very same spot for 5 minutes, kill this dude who just miraculously returned to life again, and bring his head to a town guard who pays you 10 silver for it, after he's already paid 10 silver for the very same head 5 minutes ago to someone else. Then you see players with names like Silent Destroyer X or I Love Burgers. Maybe a group of 100 Horde guys breaks into Ironforge and kill Magni, and it has absolutely no impact on the world. Just as nothing you do, even if you kill guys like Ragnaros or KT, has a major impact on the world. In the end, it's still just an MMO. I'd love to play Classic again, and I agree that immersion is much greater than in retail, but it's still worlds apart from immersion that you would find in good single-player RPGs. So it's not my main reason that I play. Again, this is a point that lovers of World of Warcraft and of MMOs in general are quite aware of, but choose perhaps not to acknowledge at times. The inherent problem with adventuring in a world like Azeroth, that's populated by thousands of players on your server, is that you're not actually changing the world via your actions. Remember that evil Fire Lord you killed who you stopped from bringing about the hour of twilight upon the world? Well, turns out he's been running around behind your back letting other adventurers kill him too. The nerve of the guy, and to be so public about it. You're nothing special in the world because the content that you're supposedly affecting is simply lathered, rinsed and repeated by another player very soon after. There's no permanency, perhaps outside of the opening of the AQ gates in the Scarab Lord title. Real-world situations like other real people needing to do the content affect the experience and immersion. Also, as the poster says, it is true. It doesn't help with immersion when your brave character named Borodin or Herthan or something appropriate is walking by others named Poon Daddy and Captain Teabag. However, one thing I picked up on is this poster mentions that the single-player RPG experience is superior due to things like spawning. But mobs respawn in games like The Witcher and things like that, so I wouldn't go too nuts with that submission. I guess there is a bit more permanency with bosses, however, in single-player RPGs, so I do sort of see where they're coming from. What do you think? Are single-player games superior in the immersion stakes? Write to the show and let me know. Feedback at countdowntoclassic.com. We move on again to the Immersion is Life crowd with this submission from Sawyer M. Black. My life is loud. I work in the aircraft building industry and there is nothing but loud noise constantly for 8 hours plus per day. When I leave work, I'm often around friends and family who have kids and they're also not a quiet experience. To make matters worse, I live right by the airport and jets fly directly over my apartment all day and night. I play World of Warcraft because I feel like it calms and quiets my mind from all of my loud life. It's such a relaxing thing for me just to be hanging out in some zone in the middle of the night and maybe no one's around. That's why Desolace is one of my favorite zones, because often it's dead. Vanilla for me is pure stress relief. And the point that poster clearly raises is the calming and unwinding powers that vanilla World of Warcraft possesses. The relaxation that it can provide to certain players is more than enough to become immersed in the world. Do you escape to Azeroth in order just to chill the fuck out? Does it make you feel relaxed and have a certain feeling or experience wash over you and make you feel at ease? Much in the same way that some people might pop on a certain soundtrack when they fall asleep, the old noises of the beach or noises of the forest, something that just soothes the savage beast inside of you. Is that what you experience when you go to places like Desolace, Elwyn Forest, Duskwood, perhaps for me? It is nice to take a step back and be able to unwind with World of Warcraft. I do have a very stressful job. I'm in court all day, every day, arguing a lot. I talk most of the day. And then ironically, I come home from work and I talk a lot more for this podcast. But I like to shut the fuck up and just listen to the ambient noise of World of Warcraft and get lost in a place where there is at times no stress. Now, granted, a lot of other times there's a boatload of stress, but I can avoid that if I so choose. I can go fishing for half an hour somewhere. I can simply go exploring in a quiet area and just take in the sights and sounds. There are a lot of different options that World of Warcraft offers to its players in how you experience the game and also how you digest it. You can go for the frenetic pace if you want, or you can slow things down and just relax. The next post I bring you is back to the anti-immersion crowd who say this, and this is from Lapa Pro. I absolutely disagree with you. No one is forcing you to do grind reps, flashy mounts, or get better armor. I am a lore fan, and I play WoW for the story. I stopped playing in Wrath of the Lich King and resubbed in October of 2017. 6 months have passed and I still haven't completed the main story. I'm now entering the Tomb of Sargeras. I am doing all the possible side quests. I am exploring the world and obviously progressing through the story. I understand your appeal of playing a more realistic game, and I agree vanilla is more realistic. But for a player like me who just plays for the story, retail is far superior because voice acting, cinematics, and storytelling through quests. Most of the quests in vanilla barely had any impact on the main story. Retail still has its problems, which I will discuss after I finish the main story, but it delivers a better lore experience than vanilla. And the point that post obviously raises is if we're talking about pure narratives and stories here for the players who obviously, like me and like a lot of you who have gotten in contact with me, love the lore of the game. You're here for a kick-ass story. It is the framework of the narrative of this fantasy world that has sucked us in and keeps us playing. Personally, that's a big number one factor for me. And a lot of you would be saying, but Josh, the vanilla story, he's right. It really wasn't there. Well, I would disagree somewhat in that the background story was there. A lot of the lore is about the history of things that happened and led up to why things the way they are now. That's something that personally I love. Now, when we talk of the vanilla story versus the retail story, unfortunately, I'm really not able to comment too much. However, of course, I've gone onto YouTube, and of course, I've seen a lot of the cinematics and a lot of the way in which that the story has evolved over the years. And I do agree that the story has gotten far more attention in recent years as opposed to what it did in vanilla. And the way in which they tell that story is amazing. The cinematics in World of Warcraft are obviously world class and they look phenomenal. And I do know that Blizzard has taken a much more dynamic approach to the storytelling in the game by way of getting the players far more involved in the actual overarching narrative. Now, for the moment, I might well concede that because of this focus on Blizzard's behalf in really turning more to a narrative-based game through the later expansions, it may well be the case that that is a better situation now. However, if I might just slightly go into bat for the vanilla narrative, it's fantastic. It's simple. There's things happening everywhere. And sure, it didn't pop up all the time through questing. And there were a lot of long periods in the game where you feel like there wasn't a lot of important story stuff happening. But I still feel like we got enough that it floated my boat as a narrative-driven person. But back to what this poster is actually saying, and it's saying that if you were someone who needed that story to suck you in immersion-wise, you got such bare bones in vanilla that it wasn't quite enough, and you might have felt a bit unattached from your hero and their place in Azeroth. And with that, it's time to move on to the second topic of Forum and Fauna for the week. And as you'll have noticed, the last 2 weeks here on Countdown to Classic on these Monday episodes, I have started to get a little bit more specific with at least one topic per week. And the last 2 weeks, I've covered off on a couple of classes. Initially, I did Paladins, and then last week, I did Druids. And then someone mentioned to me this week that they'd love to see the moment in time when I get to Priests. So I figured, fuck it. Let's just do priests now. But this isn't priests in general. I wanted to focus actually on shadow priests. This is a spec that's somewhat near and dear to my heart because I have rolled somewhere between 6 to 1,800 shadow priests, I would say. I keep creating shadow priests. You know what the weird part is? I can't get one past about level 30 or so. I don't know why I keep giving up. I find the early leveling process so fun as a shadow priest. But as a lot of you know, the majority of my experience in the game is as a rogue. However, if I ever were to get serious about an alt, this is obviously definitely the class that I would look to. So I thought, let's focus on shadow priests and talk about how their role comes into play in World of Warcraft, vanilla. And I start up with this post. This is what drew my attention to this topic for the week. This is on the official forums from a user named Tadkins, who says this. Just another route I'm considering going with in Classic. The original face melters. I'm actually playing one in the live game right now, and while of course it won't be the same thing in Classic, I do like the general aesthetics and feel of the spec, and am considering going with that as my main. I've never actually played one in vanilla, so I have a few questions for the veterans of the class. And this next post brings up just a few of the base facts that we kind of know about Shadow Priests. And this was from user Quee, who started with this. Well, they actually started with rating the class in general. And they said solo, 8 out of 10, I presume. Dungeons, 5. PvP, 8. Rating, 5. Shadow Priests are limited to 1 per raid since they are mainly there to buff warlock damage with shadow weaving. Their DPS is subpar, but the utility you mentioned can be useful. Dropping shields or heals on people in crucial moments can change the tide of a fight. Unfortunately, some of their utility, such as Vampiric Embrace, isn't warranted because it eats up a valuable debuff spot. The main job of a Shadow Priest is to keep up 5 stacks of Shadow Weaving. They can come through in a pinch, but most of the time you're just there to support Warlock DPS. In PvP, they are really, really strong in a solo setting, perhaps the best one-on-one class in the game. In Battlegrounds, they aren't great because mages and warlocks have much more control and a discipline/holy priest is probably going to be preferred. You can certainly find a spot in a raiding guild, but it will be competitive. Not to mention if/when the debuff limit is 8, most guilds probably won't want a Shadow Priest at all. When the limit is increased to 16, that will be your time to shine. So now that we know a few of the base facts about what it is to be a Shadow Priest in vanilla, and a lot of us do know that, but this is more tuned to people who don't know a whole lot about Shadow Priests and might be considering rolling one, or secondly, to those people who feel that they know Shadow Priests relatively well, but perhaps haven't played one themselves and need a bit of a refresher course. So we're going to go through the pros and cons of Shadow Priests, and I'm going to look at PvE and PvP. So we start with PvE, with this submission from user Mavis, who says, they were still perfectly playable in lower-end content, such as Stratholme, Skullomance, BRD, and lower UBRS. If you have a reputation as being a damn good Shadow Priest on your server, then you might be able to find a spot in a raid as its sole Shadow Priest, but don't count on it. Now, you might have just heard me when I was reading out Skullomance. I said Skullomance instead of Scholomance. I said Scholomance for years, and then I read the other day that apparently it's supposed to be pronounced Skullomance. The reason being, it was the school of necromancy, hence the shortened Skullomance. So I thought that was rather interesting, and please do write me an angry email if you say, Josh, no way, it's not supposed to be said like that. But I think that actually makes a lot of sense. But anyway, moving into that post and its point. The point is, do not expect to be popular as a Shadow Priest. If you're playing a Shadow Priest, you're pretty likely to be the last person picked in the basketball game. You are definitely the one waiting for a dance at the school dance. Now, in saying that, you have your role. As we've mentioned before, the whole shadow weaving concept. That is quite important if your raid has a few locks along for the ride. That buff to their damage is crucial to burning down bosses quicker. However, you must be aware that if raiding is your intention, as they say, there's likely only one Shadow Priest going along for the ride. And there may only be just a couple of Shadow Priests in the guild as a whole, one for main raiding and one as a backup. You're not there for your DPS capabilities. You're there for your utility. And quite frankly, you're just there because you buff one other class, mainly. Sure, you can do a few more things. You can pop off an emergency heal and things like that. And, you know, your DPS isn't 0. It's still doing something. It's just not overly high. But while Shadow Priests weren't overly uncommon in PvP, you'd obviously definitely see many around because they were actually quite solid in PvP, you wouldn't see that many running around in the PvE environment. That is at 60, as Holy was the predominant spec for priests once they got to endgame content. But we move on to the next post from Cotiz, who says this. In patch 1.7, the debuff slot limit increases from 8 to 16. This is when it becomes viable to raid as Shadow. A lot of guilds will bring one along for an extra power word shield, dispel, and to buff up warlock damage. The more warlocks in a raid group, the more desirable a Shadow Priest becomes. They aren't bad, but they are brought for utility more so than for their DPS. And the point of that post is, actually, I should say, I said earlier that pretty much all you're there to do is to buff warlock damage. But obviously this post brings up that you've got dispel as well. So you have utility. You're not completely useless. It's all good. But the main point of that post is this. Hooray, patch 1.7. Now, with that patch coming out, and if we get patch progression, this is something maybe to mark on the calendar, there will definitely be a spot for you after that patch. There's now 16 debuff slots. That's a fair few. And guess who can have one? You, Mr. or Mrs. Shadow Priest. You can have one. Not just one. I said one, not so fast. But definitely the 1.7 patch was a little bit of a game changer for Shadow Priests, as they wanted to become more, as this post says, quote unquote, viable, or at least somewhat desirable to raiding guilds. However, as we know, the game isn't completely about raids. Of course, Shadow Priest could PvE as well without too much trouble, as far as I'm aware. I never had many dramas with it, but there was a certain point where once you'd done all the PvE content that you could do and you wanted to end game, well, what would one do? Perhaps turn to a raiding guild. Or you might jump into PvP, which is what we'll be discussing soon. But when we talk about things like patch 1.7 and what it did for priests, or shadow priests I should say, keep in mind that if we go through patch progression in World of Warcraft Classic, well, then we start at 1.1, as some people are asking for. Not me, some people are asking for patch 1.1. And I've got a funny feeling that the very next topic on Forum and Fauna could be touching on that very issue. But just before we get there, this particular point with Shadow Priest is that if we do start at patch 1.1, well, guess who's looking at a little bit of time on the bench, more than likely? Shadow Priests. You'll be waiting patiently for that 1.7 patch when that debuff slot limit is increased, and you can just muck around and do other things until then, I guess. The next post comes from a user whose name was deleted, and they say the following. My experience as a Shadow Priest in instances, not full-on raids, has been being out of mana. Actually, just as a Shadow Priest in general, I'm out of mana more often than not. Also, the only reason Shadow Priest would ever be used in a raid is for shadow weaving. You're basically there so that warlocks can get more damage. So yeah, in PvE raid terms, Shadow Priests are almost useless, other than that plus 15% shadow damage. If you're looking for a high damage dealing caster class, you're probably wanting a warlock. Now that user raises a couple of points. Out of mana? Are Shadow Priests out of mana a lot? That's a dirty word, or a dirty phrase, I should say, to me, because I hate playing casters who are consistently out of mana. Now, I didn't experience this a lot as an early leveler of Shadow Priests, but I appreciate that leveling up from 1 to 30 like I did, which is nothing, could be very different to what's happening in raids. And I have now seen a fair few posts raising this issue of the PvP and the raiding Shadow Priest frequently being out of mana. PvPers were suggesting that after a lot of fights, you would have to, well, after one fight basically, you would have to sit down and drink. Raiders were suggesting that you were consistently on your ass because you were burning out of mana so often. Now again, this is a concept that's foreign to me. I haven't done this. But all you Shadow Priests out there, let me know. Is that the case? Should I not look into rolling a Shadow Priest in Classic if I don't like spending time on my butt drinking? Because that doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me. But we move on to the next post from Dig Recluse, who says this. Here's my biased point of view. I rated mostly as Shadow in vanilla with a mix of BWL, ZG and AQ20 gear. My guild absolutely hated it and basically wouldn't give me any gear until either the mages and locks didn't need the off pieces, or other healing only priests had their set gear. But I do remember doing comparable DPS to other casters and not going out of mana that often. And of course on top of that, you have shadow weaving for locks, which is pretty massive. And the point of that post is, once again, we get the notion of shadow weaving. Yes, we get it. Shadow priests have shadow weaving. That really does seem to be the major thing that they're good for. Surely all you shadow priests out there are yelling, we can do so much more than shadow weaving. Please just give us a chance. We're so misunderstood. But it keeps coming up. But this user actually says that it was very, very hard to get gear. And I appreciate the conundrum that Shadow Priests would have been in when gear was being handed out after bosses were downed in raids. There were a lot of people that could have used that gear. As this poster said, mages, locks, first in line for the exact kind of stuff that you're looking at, that you're staring at lustily. The Shadow Priests and your lackluster DPS, they're not trying to buff you first and foremost. They're looking to the real caster DPS classes. Oh, you Shadow Priests say, that's a cold-blooded blow, Josh. Settle down. But a lot of posts that I've read have said the DPS is very, very much so mid-tier. And mid-tier is probably even being a little bit polite. But at least that post has said that perhaps the out of mana experience is a little bit overblown and doesn't happen that often. But another thing I want to add on top of that is, and this is more a question to all of you listeners, please do email me and tell me if you agree with this. Is Shadow Priest simply another spec or class, as all of them are, perhaps subject to the skill of the player playing it? Can you have a kick-ass player put behind the wheel of a Shadow Priest who could actually potentially push damage meters and contest for that top slot or perhaps top 3 slots of DPS within a raid? Or is it just simply not possible? Even when geared out, even when with an amazing player driving, they are simply not built to succeed. Email the show and let me know, because I really want to know, because I'm still considering playing one. Feedback at countdowntoclassic.com. We move on to the next post from user Paramonium, who says this: I PvP'd and raided as a Shadow Priest for years. I was in a great guild with some open-minded people, and that definitely helps. But Shadow Priests are by no means bad. It was especially a lot easier to raid a Shadow after the debuff patch, though. If you have mana problems, carry a lot of potions and find a good rhythm for using Mind Blast that won't make you go out of mana and be useless. I think two of the things that hurts Shadow Priests the most are a lack of AoE damage and having Mind Flay get interrupted. The range isn't normally a huge deal, but sometimes the bosses are too far to Mind Flay, or doing constant AoE damage, or in very mobile situations. There isn't a lot you can do if your dots are up and Mind Blast is on cooldown. You'll get killed on the damage meters and feel fairly useless in certain trash pools and specific phases of fights. I could quote-unquote compete on the damage meters sometimes, and on specific fights, but overall, you can't really touch pure DPS damage, especially rogues. I remember beating some hunters and warlocks and feeling quite accomplished, but that was usually due to proper rotations, superior gear, or who knows what. A good 25 to 50% of people in the 40-mans were really phoning it in on some nights. At the end of the day, being a competent and useful player is vitally more important than fitting into some cookie-cutter role or spec, so just do whatever you find most fun or interesting. Although you might face some adversity for playing an off-spec, just remember that most people are idiots, and it's just a game. And the point of that post was obviously to get a bit more into the specifics of things. And they're saying essentially that it's up to the player to determine how useful this Shadow Priest is going to be. If you can work out a little bit of a customized rotation that works for you, then you can avoid the out of mana issue. And you can somewhat push your way up the DPS meters. Even though it's not a terribly complicated rotation, still work on it. See what works best for you and see if you can change your timing slightly to get that slight advantage, perhaps in just a few percentage points moving up the DPS meters. What they also say is this: don't be put off by the fact that you are playing an off-spec. As we all know in World of Warcraft, do what you have fun with. Don't listen to min-maxers. Don't listen to people who all want to give you this advice and that advice. Because sure, there are certain classes that kick ass at certain things. If you want to top certain meters, the information is out there to go and do what you need to do. But ultimately, if you just want to have fun and you want to rock a Shadow Priest because you think they're cool, then do that. And you having fun with the spec and class will push you to achieve more with it. And you can make the most of it and perhaps become the Shadow Priest that proves everyone wrong. So maybe there are ways around being a quote-unquote bad spec. But now we move on to PvP with the following post from Mr. Hoon, who says this: The reason Shadow Priests were great at PvP was more gear-orientated than being due to spells. For example, a fully buffed Warlord Shadow Priest had over 6,000 HP. Even warriors in Warlord gear had just a few more HP than Shadow Priests. Since spell damage was almost non-existent, despite Mindflay having a disgustingly bad 52% spell coefficient for a 3-second channel, it dealt a lot of damage for its time, and Mindflay slowed/stunned with Blackout and kept dealing so much damage. Long ago, Shadow Priest had a talent called Focused Casting. It was a 1-minute cooldown spell that allowed the priest to cast anything for 6 seconds without getting interrupted, because long ago improved Shadow Form didn't exist. Unless you can purge, Power Word Shield plus Shadow Form equaled a warrior not getting rage for a long time. Warriors were so easy to kill. Lol. Shadow Weaving equaled 15% long ago, Shadow Form equaled 15%, and Darkness equaled 10%. Even without spell damage, Shadow Priests hit hard. Vampiric Embrace was like 25% of damage or something. Devouring Plague was a godsend, as it used to heal 100% of your damage done long ago. It still costed a shitload of mana, but with spell damage gear and so much plus percentage, it literally healed the Shadow Priest 50% of HP. And before fear nerfs, a geared Shadow Priest could literally kill people within the fear duration, but the instant fear was something even Warlocks envied about us. Not to mention, Shadow Word Pain hit like a truck long ago. So basically, melee couldn't deal enough damage to break shields, casters couldn't deal enough damage to kill the priest because of Vampiric Embrace and Devouring Plague, and we had healing and dispel. The only class who could remotely match priests were shamans, but shamans sucked ass except elemental long ago. And the point of that post was to, throw a shitload of very helpful information at you. There's a lot of stats there and a lot of chat about some very specific things that Shadow Priest can do to kick ass at PvP. Now, I haven't PvP'd in the past a lot, as many of you know. So, information like this helps me a lot. It's nice to know that there is hope for the Shadow Priests after all. It's not all doom and gloom. They have something to do. And this is what Blizzard did with class design back in vanilla. Not everything was supposed to be a raiding spec. A lot of classes had a very clear PvP spec. Many classes had a spec that clearly was superior for PvP, and the Shadow Priest was one of them. In PvP, the more prevailing thought is that Shadow Priests pretty much kicked ass. And we got to a few posts that actually tried to debunk that theory, and we'll get to them soon. But we start off with a little bit of optimism for the Shadow Priests, saying these are all the amazing tools at your disposal. Instant fear? Yes, please. Shadow Word Pain? A dot that actually really fucking hurts? Yes, please. All of that stuff sounds amazing, and there's buffs and buffs galore to your shadow damage that can't help but lead you to victory. But we hear from the opposing side with user 54JB3R7, who says this: Shadow Priests are a miserable experience. You have almost no gear available to you and can't even play Shadow Priests until the Zul'Gurub patch because of debuff slots. You have low priority for gear and deal pitiful DPS in most boss fights. When you spawn in a battleground, you buff up, and even after just buffing yourself, you're now nearly out of mana and have to drink. Hope you asked a mage each log in for some water. You kill or try to kill a player and you're now out of mana again. Drink up. Your damage can be dispelled. Hope they don't have a paladin or priest who pays attention. Hunters and priests will Viper Sting and mana burn you all day. Even more drinking. In duels, you thought you were king? Well, mages can Shadow Reflect and double ice block your mana to the ground. It's not an auto win. Warlocks flat out beat you with better DPS and similar HP and better CC. Rogues win if equally geared and they go full DPS except kick. You need to be lucky with blackout procs to win against them. Hunters in the open field can Viper Sting you dead. Shamans murder you. Paladins only die if you mana burn, and once well geared enough, they can survive even out of mana and slowly kill you. And other priests will just heal and mana burn you and win. The idea that Shadow Priests are an insane PvP class is laughable. Priest is a great PvP class, not Shadow Priests. And with that post, I'm saying, but I thought PvP was my saving grace as a Shadow Priest. I thought that last person just told me how awesome it was, and now you've completely shat on the whole concept of being a PvP Shadow Priest. So wait. I'm screwed against pretty much everyone? I mean, basically I can kill warriors and not really anyone else? That doesn't sound like a good time. I don't want to be the one that everyone's beating up on. Well, I mean, I guess there's a lot of good points there, and the whole point of PvP is that every attack has a possible great counterattack. I'm sure, however, there must be a few things that Shadow Priests can do in reaction to some of the positives of the other classes that could overcome some of the things that we just heard about, right? Well, we go back to the pro Shadow Priest crowd with They Call Me Inky, who says, Shadow Priests are insane at one-on-one if you have an eighth of a brain in vanilla. I could hold up well in rank 8 gear with fell cloth head and shoulders and PvP rings and trinkets and necks. I would roll people. And after that post, I'm saying, well, I have an eighth of a brain, I hope. Does that mean that I can do something with the Shadow Priests? However, the one problem with that post is they clearly said in one-on-one situations. Now, granted, a lot of PvP somewhat is one-on-one. However, in a few battleground situations, obviously in places like Warsong Gulch and things like that, you might find that it's a bit more of a group scenario and many people are actually trying to gank you. Now, is this the factor? Because obviously some classes are more prone to being able to perhaps handle multiple assailants. Shadow Priests may not be one of them. But we move back again to the anti-Shadow Priest camp, again with another submission from 54JB3R7, who really must have something against Shadow Priests. And they say this: Shadow Priests are vastly overrated for PvP and vanilla. Sure, often enough you get to slap on dots and melt someone in PvP, for instance a hunter, but is it really that fun? In all honesty, not really. A Shadow Priest is something I'd only ever recommend to someone who wants to be a unique snowflake. For anyone else who likes the playstyle, go Warlock. Similar survivability, better DPS, better crowd control, and with more utility. Wow, vastly overrated? Does that seem a bit harsh, or is it quite correct? Write to the show and let me know. feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. But yes, Warlocks and Shadow Priests often do get compared in terms of play style. They are both caster DPS classes and inevitably will be somewhat compared side by side along with a mage, although people do sort of put mage in their own little group over there. But I don't know. I find dots kind of fun. I find face melting a little bit of fun, even if it's done by way of dots. How do you feel? And we go into the final post from user Ignatius, who says, the thing that was our biggest weakness as Shadow Priests, at least back then, was melee. Like now, we were fine against casters. But we had access to much higher armor ratings in vanilla. Depending on how you chose to gear a Shadow Priest, it could very easily have 70+% physical damage reduction in Shadow form. So we weren't squishy like we are now. Our damage was just as crappy then compared to other casters in similar gear. Actually worse, to be honest. But unlike so many other casters, we could take a punch. Secondly, back in vanilla, there were 3 reliable ways to break fear, but you had to be an undead warrior with a blacksmithing specialization to get them all. So our crowd control was more potent, weak, but at least useful. And finally, though probably most importantly, priests were the healer. Sure, other people could heal, but not like priests. So we got the raid gear, including DPS pieces. And in vanilla, you had to raid in order to PvP effectively because the gear gap was so large. With enough raid gear, you could ruffle stomp those without it. And I guess the reason I bring up that final post is this. There's going to be pros and cons to every spec and every class. With the Shadow Priest in PvP, as this user says, you can take a punch, but you can't really give them so much. But maybe in a war of attrition, you will win in the end. But, as we say, pros and cons. There's no reason not to play a Shadow Priest, as they're not broken beyond the point of repair. And they're also a spot of fun at times if you do like to try and do a little bit of face melting in PvP. Some people say they are absolutely fantastic for PvP. Some people say they're a little bit overrated. But guess what? You're going to hear that about every class and spec in the game. And with that, as someone who knows very little about priests, I hope I didn't completely embarrass myself there, but it was obviously more just to get a few more bits of information out there to you if you are considering playing a Shadow Priest in Classic. And I found one video that I definitely do recommend. If you go on YouTube and you look for Sexy, S-E-K-S-I, The Beginning, type that into YouTube as a bit of a search and you'll get a really, really good Shadow Priest PvP video that apparently was one of the go-to Shadow Priest PvP videos back in the day. And it was really, really entertaining and showed off that Shadow Priest really can frickin' do some stuff. So I loved that in watching that for this episode. Anyway, we move on to the third topic of Forum and Fauna this week, and that is this. Why a Frankenpatch might not work. That was the title of the post over on the official forums that I caught from user Taragor, who says this. Now, this one's a little bit of a long one, people, because it's a little bit of a heavy topic, and I'm sure it's going to get some juices flowing. So listen to this one. If you're advocating for Blizzard Entertainment to make a Frankenpatch, then you're advocating for them to make changes. That is where they can mess up the game. You would be advocating for them to create a state of vanilla that's never existed before, even if it weren't for the newness of service and the state of the community. Whether or not the changes are in the scope of vanilla are irrelevant, because a Frankenpatch would involve creating a state of vanilla which has never existed before, even if you don't count the different community and newness of every server, which involves making changes. Allowing them to make a Frankenpatch is almost as bad as letting them make any changes that they want to make. All you'd be doing by limiting them to a Frankenpatch is limiting what kinds of changes they can make, which admittedly would prevent them from messing up the game in a lot of ways. But there still would be a lot of ways in which they could mess the game up. If they are incompetent developers, then it is more likely than not that they will mess the game up, whether it be a Frankenpatch or not. Even though I shouldn't have to provide any examples, I will. These are not actual quotes. Hey, maybe we should take away cat form from druids, which was first added in patch 1.3, and then give druids no compensation for it at all whatsoever. What if we never nerfed Mortal Strike's damage from 200% weapon damage to 100% weapon damage plus X, and then we didn't make any other warrior changes? Ooh, what if we undid the change in patch 1.5 where spirit healers in Battlegrounds automatically resurrected the hunter's pet after resurrecting the hunter? Of course, I doubt that Blizzard Entertainment or their new hires for classic WoW development are actually that stupid. But do you think that they're that stupid? If they mess up classic WoW to the point where you won't play it, then they messed up classic WoW to the point where you won't play it. Whether they turn it into Warlords of Draenor, or late Wrath of the Lich King, or the Burning Crusade, or just a broken version of vanilla that never existed. If you really think that they're that stupid, then advocate for no changes instead of a Frankenpatch. Either do a one-to-one patch progression or settle on one particular patch as was if you want no changes. But if you trust them to do progressive endgame content release as well, then please do that too. I'll also mention on a somewhat unrelated note that I'm a pro-changes guy, but that's not what this thread is about. Now, thank you for listening to that long post. That was an interesting one, and that obviously introduces this topic of 1.1, or as they say, patch progression versus the Frankenpatch argument. Now, that initial post that I just spent a bit of time reading out is obviously one that is quite pro one-to-one progression through classic World of Warcraft. There's a large group of fans out there who really do feel that patch progression is not only the best way to go, but the only way to go. And we're going to get into it now with a little bit of pro-patch progression argument versus pro-Frankenpatch argument in a static state. So here we go. Starting with pro 1.1 and patch progression with user Nalal, who says this: one-to-one patch progression emulation is the only answer. Making a change is not subjective. If it's a change, it's a change. And the point that user raises is obviously if you want the vanilla experience, the total vanilla and unchanged vanilla experience, then you want patch progression. Any other way, guess what? That's a change, because that's not what we got back in the day. When we call for vanilla and we call for classic, we call for the evolving of an MMO as we got back in the day. MMOs are not static states. They are constantly evolving games. If we got a static game that never required any form of maintenance whatsoever, that's not an MMO. You're essentially playing a single-player RPG that never gets patched, just with other people, I guess, in an online world. Well, we move on to the next point that says this, and this is the pro-Frankenpatch argument, posted by Starman. This post assumes everyone's going to start on day one and all raid together. It does not take into account people that start later. That's a very good point from this post, and quite frankly one that doesn't come up very often when we talk about patch progression. What about the people who don't necessarily dive into World of Warcraft Classic on day one? Not everyone is going to be there at the outset. I know all of us are, because we are absolutely busting for this game, but there will be some people who were late to the party, much like some of us were with the original iteration of World of Warcraft. Not all of us were day one joinees. In fact, the vast minority of us were. I've spoken to a boatload of people since I started this podcast. And how many day one subscribers have I met? Maybe a few, 2, 3 I think I've spoken to. A lot of people started very close to launch, but not at launch. Now, I know a lot of you did, so I'm not discounting you, but I'm just saying people come to the game later on, whether it's a few weeks later, a few months later, or a year or two later. So if we do patch progression, are we simply to deny people who come later on of that experience? Sorry, you're late to the party. You don't get to know what it was like to have certain instances or raids roll out over time. You don't get to know what the talents were like back then. You don't get to know what basically the game was like at the outset. Now, I realize that there are ways around this in terms of launching new servers and things of that nature. If there a fresh server comes along, people can always jump on that for the whole experience. But in general, that's basically what's going to happen. You are giving the middle finger to these players. Well, it's not quite the middle finger, but you're sort of saying, sorry, we're kind of doing a thing here. We're going along in time. And if you come later to the party, then you're just going to have to deal with what you're given at the time. You don't get the same experience that everyone else did. But I thought it was an interesting angle that doesn't come up very often. We move on to the next post from Countdown to Classic Discord member 7 Winters. And again, everyone, if you're on the Discord, I'm quite likely to read out stuff that you post in there that's thoughtful and insightful. So please do join the Countdown to Classic Discord. The link is in the show notes. But 7 Winters says this: I wonder if people even realize how broken 1.1 was. I think some people are like, oh yeah, start from the beginning, without even knowing what that entails. I mean, I actually started in 1.1.2 and I don't even remember most of it. Lol. The point there is, be careful what you wish for. A lot of these people crying out for 1.1, give us patch progression, give us patch progression. Take a breath, take a moment, and really think about what you're asking for, because 1.1, it's quite well known, was a bit of a buggy mess. But Josh, you say, touche, we're going to get 1.1 with all the bugs cleaned up. Well, are we? We haven't been told. But let's presume that we probably are. Yes, getting all the bugs cleaned up. So back to the beginning of the game, 1.1, no bugs. What's the problem? Well, nonetheless, you've got issues with talents that obviously were fixed a lot over time. A lot of people don't want to go back to what they viewed as many classes having broken talents and talent trees back at the inception of the game. And then you've got many little things, such as people not showing up on the map for raid leaders and things like that. So when they're trying to organize a group, they didn't know where the hell everyone was. And there's a really good explanation on YouTube. If you jump on Hamster Wheel's YouTube channel, he does about a half an hour breakdown of everything that was wrong with 1.1 that perhaps has been lost with the passage of time by people's memories. I do recommend you go and check that out. But the moral of the story is, just like I say, be careful what you wish for, because you think you do, but you don't. But we move back to the Pro 1.1 crowd with user Kalzarath, who says this: arguing for a static world is counter not only to a good game, but also logic. If community-based projects can put out patches that mimic vanilla WoW content, itemization, and debuff slots, then Blizzard can absolutely do it and must do it if they want their game to be better quality than the private servers. That said, what will those patches look like? The most logical thing is a classic 1.0, a mix of things like bug fixes and various fixes or corrections from 1.1 to 1.12, like adding all of the quests in Desolace, or launch that zone that basically was just empty land with no trees or mobs, and I mean Desolace, not Silithus. But for the gameplay, talents and mechanics to be the 1.1 versions. I believe the best answer is every time new content is released, the appropriate class/game state changes should be rolled in with the content, so there's only 4 to 5 content patches through the 2-year life of Classic. That all said, I expect Blizzard will make many changes that, heavens above, are not something they did during vanilla. Fix bugs, add holiday events, and balance PvE content. This could include removing some of the strategies that have been in use on private servers that trivialize content in a way that was never intended. For Classic to be a good game, we have to give Blizzard the leeway to make tweaks to the game to preserve the intended gameplay. As players have spent the last 15 years dissecting the game, it's left the gameplay in a state that isn't reflective of what Classic was. And I guess the point of that post is this: we have to do patch progression because that's what the competition is doing. And when I say competition, I obviously mean the private servers, which this poster directly references. Some private servers are not going to go away upon the release of Classic. We know that much as a fact. Some have already said, we're not going anywhere. Some have said, of course, we'll close up shop. The whole point was to get WoW Classic, and now it's here, we don't need to exist. But with private servers, what they tend to do is roll through patch progression. They give users the ability to relive the vanilla days by going through timed content. Here we go. Here's patch 1.5. Now here's patch 1.6, and so forth every couple of months. People can view the calendar and say, so that's when we're getting that. Sweet. I have something to look forward to. Now, if Blizzard wants to compete with that private server experience, why not do the exact same thing and up the ante? Do it even better than they're doing it so that you can absolutely crush them. Why not offer patch progression? That's how everyone else who has been emulating you, Blizzard, has been doing it. Why set yourself apart from the crowd if that's clearly what people have been enjoying? Well, we move back to the pro Frankenpatch crowd with this post from Ezrudan, who says this: I still believe a Frankenpatch is the way to go. Take the best of what worked. Tweak what didn't. Create a state of vanilla that never existed. Well, that sounds a lot like the Classic experience. I honestly think that's where the game is going to go. There's no early game, no one misses out. It takes the best of the vanilla era and puts it in a neat little bow for everyone to enjoy. Everyone's on the same page, as balanced as it gets, as fair as it gets. It just makes sense. If you want them to gate raids, by all means. I have no horse in that race, so whatever. That post raises an interesting point. By creating a Frankenpatch that never actually existed, it's actually not technically a change because the whole point of vanilla was changing things as we went along. It would be doing nothing but keeping in the spirit of vanilla, evolving and evolving. This would just be the next state of the game, a more perfected state, coming back with revisionist history and saying, okay, let's just put our classic hats on, not having a retail influence. If we go back to how we thought about classic and we will look to perfect it, this is what we would have done. And that could be a Frankenpatch that solves all of our problems. However, obviously it's not going to solve every single last problem because undoubtedly you cannot please everyone. I have no doubt that if they released a Frankenpatch that absolutely resolved every issue that everyone has ever documented with vanilla on a forum ever, someone would think of something new. Oh, now this is broken. Oh, now buff this. Oh, now nerf that. That's just how it works. We get more and more accustomed to the way in which a game works, and we find parts of it that we're not entirely happy with, even though they work pretty well, and we bitch about them. But a Frankenpatch is still the way to go, even though you're not necessarily doing it just to appease people. It's just to put the game in the best possible state. Back to the Pro 1.1 crowd who say this with user Eldervane. In an ideal world, we would start at bug fixed 1.1 and progress from there on a timeline similar to original vanilla patch cycles. However, in that last Forbes interview, Brack stated they wanted something more maintainable because they don't want to essentially run two MMOs. It's entirely likely, probably most likely, that we'll not get a patch 1.1 to start with and progress from there. The other popular alternative is the 1.12.1 patch. I don't think that this is even remotely ideal either. I just don't think that the last 3 months of World of Warcraft with a very blatant eye towards the Burning Crusade is the penultimate vanilla experience. This is where a Frankenpatch becomes appealing. Take the most iconic versions of each feature. You make a good point that it would not be authentic vanilla, but the 1.12.1 experience isn't either, due to the way it utterly trivializes pre-1.12 content. I don't see Blizzard removing cat form, by the way, simply because they can justify doing so because catless druids were a thing for a while. On that same token, I don't see them ever releasing a vanilla server without all three battlegrounds in at launch, as much as I would love several months of pure world PvP. And the point of that post is, as much as we might like to go through patch progression all over again, and as they say, in a perfect world, that's what we would get. But in a practical world, it's not what we're going to get because a Frankenpatch is way too practical to think beyond its implementation in WoW Classic. As they say, Blizzard is on the record saying that they want to do something that's highly maintainable. They do not want to be running two MMOs. They don't. They want to keep staff low on this. They want to keep maintenance low on this. They want to keep running costs relatively low on this. They don't want to have to sit there and constantly babysit WoW Classic. It's a done game in a way, even though they're working on it now. But they know what's going to be in it. They know the principles. They don't need to be constantly updating it. They have other games to work on, namely retail WoW, that will be consuming the vast majority of their thoughts going forward. WoW Classic is a novelty and nothing less. This is not something that is going to get a lot of blood, sweat and tears from Blizzard going forward. They want to dump it on us and say, good luck with that. You got what you wanted. Now shut the fuck up. Because That's what we campaigned for. And if we get patch progression, guess what that requires? A shit ton more work. And to those of you saying, it's not a lot of work, well, it's still more than Frankenpatch would require. And Blizzard has told us they want to do the least amount of work possible, quite frankly. And that's why I think, personally, that we are definitely getting a Frankenpatch. I know that a lot of you want patch progression, but we have to think practically. And I'm only basing that mainly off the comments of Blizzard. Had Blizzard said absolutely nothing at all and gone silent, then sure, I might ponder, those crazy bastards might do patch progression. That would be crazy. But considering they've gone so far out of their way in a world that is now so devoid of classic information, the very little classic information we have actually relates to the lack of work that they want to do on it, makes me think that Frankenpatch is what's coming. That's just my guess. The next post from user Eldervane actually goes a little bit of both ways, and it says this. They were actually replying to a post that said, which is why we need to meet in the middle. There is no ideal situation. In my opinion, I think it's to take a patch in its best form instead of relying on Blizzard to take bits and pieces of each, then retune it. And what Eldervane said in response to that post was the following. I agree. It's kind of a grudging agreement, as my preference obviously lies in patch progression, but there has to be something. There are concerns that it won't be vanilla as it existed. Well, I mean, I can say that about the private server scene with their incorrect tuning and numbers and resists, and attempts to emulate progression by unlocking all later raids while running 1.12.1. How is that any different? Yet people are largely satisfied with that experience, however incorrect and inauthentic it is. I think there's a lot more wiggle room, in other words, than people actually realize. I still vastly prefer as close to 1-to-1 from 2004 to 2006 as possible, while fixing bugs and exploits. But I understand how much work that can realistically be. I'd like to see a static patch. I don't even care if it's 1.12.1, with encounters and mobs retuned to reflect their original intended difficulty, and time-gated content unlocks. It gives an appropriate nod to vanilla's constant progression, and those of us who started early enough to see, experience, and appreciate it, while still ultimately ending in the static Naxcraft versions others want. If there's enough justification to open a new server and start over again, Blizz can, while progressed and stagnating servers can remain static for the many players who legitimately do prefer that late vanilla experience. I understand that even time gating is a not so insignificant amount of additional work, as opposed to just releasing a late version of vanilla. I would hope in that case that players are given a chance to start over on a fresh server once in a while rather than languish on a rapidly stagnating realm. And as you heard, once again, that one goes a little bit of both ways, ultimately seeing that perhaps a Frankenpatch, again, is the right way to go, even though there is a great argument for patch progression. If it could be done right, why not give us that final official version of vanilla patch progression that we've all been craving? However, if we are going to see a static patch, and there seems to be a begrudging acceptance from this poster that might be the case of what we're going to get, I think, even though they definitely want patch progression, that it doesn't matter what patches it is, as long as it's static. Just give us something that's good, whichever patch you pick, whichever Frankenpatch you decide to tie together, make it something that will make the majority of people happy, and we'll deal with it. People have been happy with certain stages of Warcraft over the last few years, and as they said, it's not like private servers have been perfect, yet people still seem to flock to them and really, really enjoy them, issues and all. I'm sure if Blizzard delivers us World of Warcraft Classic, even with a couple of issues, it's really not going to hamper the experience for the majority of people. But one last post that I just want to leave you with on this one, and it says this. It's from a user named Wish Doctor's Song, and they say, The game was not a historic masterpiece. It was an in-progress MMO released too early because that's how MMOs work. They were under constant development during their lifetime and ended up in a much better place than where they started. Second, even if we did what you want, it wouldn't preserve history. You'd just relive moments and they would be gone again. You want to relive 1.4's World PvP Battle for Hillsbrad? Well, that only lasts a month until 1.5 comes out. You want to relive World PvP back and forth while people sit in the Warsong Gulch queues? That's only going to last for up to a month until 1.6 comes out with Battle Masters. Is it worth living through straight up bad talent trees, lack of core skills, stupid mechanics like no greater blessings, and Wind Fury proccing off of Wind Fury so a finite group can relive history for a month before it becomes history again, and those who aren't playing at the exact right month of time during this new rollout miss out as well? Should we live through missing content as well? Moradon filled a major gap in the leveling process. Reventusk Village was added later, making Hinterlands not suck for Horde. Could we please let Alliance get the same level of quest quality over in the Wildhammer City? Searing Gorge was pretty much sans quests as well. Western Plaguelands and Eastern Plaguelands were incomplete. Silithus had a single quest. This wasn't part of history. It was a game in progress and there's no real inherent virtue to living through it again other than to learn that it's often better to ship an incomplete but very good product and start getting revenue rather than sitting on it till it's done. I really enjoyed that last post. I think that brings up a lot of great points and really does put a little bit of food for thought on the plate of the people who want patch progression. You keep calling out to relive history, but as this user says, it's not going to be experienced for very long. All these specific patches that you might be clamoring for, they're going to be gone straight away and then never coming back to again. So what's the point in really gagging for it when we're just going to wind up at a certain point anyway, and you'll never get to do it all again unless they re-roll fresh servers. Anyway, just something to chew on. And now, with all that out of the way, it's time for anger management. Each episode, Countdown to Classic brings you some of the angriest posts that I've found throughout the week about the content that we've just discussed. And the first post I bring you is about the immersion issue. And it comes from user Tethasian, who says this. Yes! The fucking motorcycles. The last few times I've resubbed, it's been on role-playing servers because I foolishly thought that there wouldn't be that kind of stuff there. I've enjoyed seeing people in role-playing transmogs and celebrating during holidays, but it's largely the same thing, with people zooming around on ridiculous mounts in heirloom gear. Next we have this from Honourable Herbivore, who says, spot on! I think all the crazy mounts they added were extremely immersion killing. I mean, what's wrong with orcs riding wolves? Orcs driving motorcycles? Now there is a hell of a lot wrong with that. Imagine playing Warcraft 3 and you would encounter an orc riding a motorcycle in the campaign. That would be so extremely immersion breaking. Now we turn to the topic of Franken patches, and this next one was posted by a user named Yoyot, who was replying to the following post that said, so tier sets determine a class's role. Guess they better nerf Fury Warriors that aren't meant to DPS in raids because their tier set is for tanking. And Yoyot replied with this. Fury Warriors couldn't heal, you buffoon. The hybrid tax limits capabilities of various classes. Remember recuperation on rogues in Kata? How broken it was? Remember Death Siphon and Death Strike throughout the life of Death Knights? Remember Spirit Bond on Hunters along with Spirit Mend and Exhilaration? This is a PvP argument as well. It's in defense of PvP mainly. Scum like you are self-serving. Hybrids heal in raids. If they want a DPS, then you better be an overall decent and fun guy to play with and make some friends. No one will take you otherwise. Vanilla WoW was a PvP game. And the reply came in from Haha to that very post that says this. Fury could tank any raid and also be the top DPS. All they had to do was put the gear and shield on and they were still better than Feral and Prot tanks. Hybrid tax them so they are one or the other, not both. WoW has never been a PvP game. It's always been about killing monsters. PvP has just been a side quest to the main story. If you want a game that's all about PvP, go play PUBG or Fortnite. We move on to this post from user Synthor. LOL, you call Blizzard stupid and imply they're incompetent, yet you want them to build vanilla. Seriously, how dumb can you be? Furthermore, you are not playing the time evolution of vanilla. You are playing vanilla. They should be releasing a complete 1 to 60 experience with all content balanced and polished. This way, no matter when someone starts playing, they get the exact same experience as everyone else. Vanilla already happened, and unlike you, I think Blizzard will take all the best parts of vanilla and implement what makes sense. Quoting all the purists, if you don't like it, then go play BFA. Next we have this from user Xanthak, who says, you think a quality software shop like Blizzard is going to roll out a piece of trash like the private servers? They're engineers, not hacks. And that's been anger management. And with that, we move on now to winners and losers.
It wasn't going to be easy, but they've won it.
Every Monday, Countdown to Classic brings you the winners and losers of posts of the week. Some of the more insightful posts that I thought were fantastic that I've come across through the week, and also generally a loser or the worst post of the week. And the winners this week are, firstly, we start with Discord user Minoru, someone who's becoming a little bit of a minor celebrity here on the show. And they say this. Thinking about immersion, my thoughts go to the different zones and how well they were differentiated from each other, even in just the short area around the human starting zone. Elwyn Forest was tranquil and welcoming. Westfall was calm but had an air of desperation. Stormwind was grand and majestic. All of this was boosted by fantastic art, music and sound design. Our slow approach to everything, as in lack of mounts or teleports, allowed it all to soak in. People seem to love Duskwood in particular, which is interesting considering in beta it had the immersion factor of being so dark you'd have to build up a sort of survival profession and hold up a torch to see further than a few meters away. While that was taken out before release, it did show Blizzard's mindset for attention to detail back then. Then there were the dungeons. Blizzard knew people would spend a lot of time in dungeons and spent a lot of time designing them in turn. Do you think Scarlet Monastery or Naxxramas would be so beloved or talked about if they were drab and boring? Of course not. But even in unreleased yet accessible areas, the art was on another level, and particularly expressive. The Caverns of Time was breathtaking and ethereal, and unlike anything we'd ever seen before. Granted, when it officially released in Burning Crusade, we saw enough similar things in Outlands it lost a lot of its magic. On the other hand, things were much more macabre in the crypts under Karazhan. Heartbeats, the upside-down sinners, the whispers of you will die. Certainly a step up from the war crimes of Stratholme. And again, we have another Discord member, Macroplanet, who says this. Going further on art playing an importance in the immersion of World of Warcraft, Blizzard has created such a believable world because of the importance they put on art versus actual technologies at the time. When developers create something that looks close to realism, it tends to take us away from the actual experience and immersion in the world just because we already live in that realistic world. Plus, it dates the technology, so when you visit the game again in 5 to 10 years, it maybe didn't age so well. Blizzard puts so much focus on strong art that not only does it pull us into the immersion of the world, but also helps date the game. I could never figure out why it still looks good even with such low poly counts, but when you look at games that were pushing graphics and technologies at the time, like Age of Conan and Vanguard, you realize the importance of art direction over realism. WoW just looks better over time, as do a lot of Blizz games. Next we have another Discord member, a trio, and this one rounding out the group is Palfurus, who says this. The music and sound design is something that I would like to expand upon, as these are huge things for me. I might be in the minority, but I leave the in-game music on when I play because of the feelings that it evokes when I play. This goes deeper than them feels. I'm referring to feelings of tension, wonder, or even the feeling of hearth and home that I get depending on the song, or even different phrases of the same song. On the other hand, the overall sound effect design makes me feel like I'm in a complete world. Would WoW be WoW without the rustle of fabric when you open your inventory, the crackle of fires and torches, or even your friendly neighborhood goblins reminding you that time is money, friend? This is the kind of work that usually goes unthanked, but Blizzard put in the effort anyway. Now, thank you to all the Discord members for their absolutely amazing input when I put this out on the Discord earlier today. And I just want to say to everyone, those 3 entries that you just heard in a row are all incredibly insightful entries, and you can get that on the Countdown to Classic Discord on a regular basis. Those 3 members are very vocal, and there's a lot of other members who say just as many amazing things. So please do come in and have a chat with what is an incredibly mature and intelligent and fun conversation about World of Warcraft all day, every day. Anyway, I'll move on to the next post from user Xanthak about patch progression, who says this: I think we're all stuck between a rock and a hard place. Everyone is scared of changes, but while true, they can seriously screw up taking bits and pieces of the entire game and throw it into one patch. But with patch progression, they can do it also. I'd argue that with patch progression, they'll screw up even more because they aren't taking a macro-level view of the game, but only the patch. And not just one patch, but over 12 of them. Remember, these developers aren't exactly vanilla veterans we're talking about here. At least with the Franken patch, they'll be viewing the game as a whole and assessing it. When creating an authentic experience, tunnel vision can be bad. And another thing with patch progression, more code changes leads to more bugs. And that's a lot of patches, and it's going to be causing a lot of bugs. And the more code they look at is the more chances that they can add additional stuff. Wow, why does this green gear have stat A and stat B? It makes no sense. Let me change it. Oh wow, Rag actually has hidden frost resist. Let me change that too. Remember, not all changes were documented. There's probably a lot more changes under the covers that the players didn't find out about. Well, those new developers will find those changes and be like, what the fuck? I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other, by the way. Personally, I see things from a software engineering point of view because that's what I'd do. I go for the most efficient, cleanest, most concise solution. I've done these kinds of migration projects before. Versioning sets off all sorts of alarms for me, and that's what patch progression really is. Different versions of the same code. 1 million lines of code? Well, that's the same code you have to go through again, just slightly different or totally brand new, again and again for each patch. Personally, that scares me more than taking major bullet points and looking at specific pieces of code just for those bullet points. Once you start digging to the nth level, man, it'll get hairy. And the next post we have is from user Septembers, who says this: Remember, one of the first things Blizz said is they want to give us a Blizzard quality classic experience. 1.1 was an incomplete, buggy mess that people are going to make an absolute joke out of any kind of serious content. I just can't see a professional developer with a reputation for their high-polished and bug-free games releasing that in 2018. I'd expect to see a hybrid build with the polish and completeness of later vanilla. I'm talking about things like quest hubs missing and entire zones having no quests there, but with a raid and hopefully itemization and talent progression true to the original. Next we have user Tyandra, who says this: It doesn't matter what you call it, static is what's going to happen. Keep in mind that Blizzard isn't doing this to provide a fancy new MMO to the market. They're doing this so people who feel they missed out, and those with nostalgia goggles, can experience a piece of art from the past again. It's more like a museum than a new game. Now we go to user Colroids about Shadow Priests. Careful about falling into the newbie trap of thinking Shadow is some insane PvP spec. Back in retail vanilla, people would just melt face / noob stomp as undead without any real skill and own because everyone sucked. Shadow is good in 1-on-1, yeah, but bad on 1-on-X. I wouldn't say they're god tier in Battlegrounds. Your most important role in Battlegrounds as Shadow is spam dispelling. If you're Horde, you're the only class with defensive magic dispel, so your priority is dispelling polymorphs, roots, and novas, shit like that. If you're Alliance, you're the only class with offensive magic dispel, so your priority is dispelling buffs, free action potions, etc. And I just realized that I forgot to put in a loser for the week, everyone. So guess what? The loser of the week is me for being forgetful there. So I promise I'll make that up to you next week. Anyway, now it's time for Memory Lane. Each Monday, Countdown to Classic reaches out to you, the listeners, to send in your fondest or funniest memories from the vanilla days. And I just want to warn you all, this one's actually going to be a little bit of a long one just because I've got a fair few just to clean out of the closet because I have to get rid of some of these because they're starting to stack up. But thank you so much for sending them in, everyone. But after this week, I'm going to need more because I'm clearing them all out today. So please buckle up as we have a bit of fun with a fair few memory lane submissions. I think there's about half a dozen here. And we start with listener Dan, who says this. I remember an earlier episode you did where you discussed some boneheaded moves players remembered making back in vanilla, so I thought I'd share mine. I never hit level cap in vanilla as I didn't have the time to sink into it, but I did have a Tauren Hunter around level 48. Well, one day whilst waiting for a Zul'Farrak group, I was marauding around Tanarus, leaving a path of destruction and laying waste to the local wildlife, when suddenly, a world drop epic. I looted this shining beauty and was euphoric. It was what turned out to be the only epic quality item I would possess in vanilla WoW. Excited and hardly able to contain it, I equipped it so I could show off my new bling. The only problem? It was a flurry axe. Yeah, an axe with no stats that only gave melee swings a chance to trigger an extra attack. On a hunter. Clearly this was designed for warriors or enhancement shamans, and I could have sold it for a mint on the auction house. About 2 days after equipping it, I realized my moronic mistake and had deep regrets about it, but looking back, I remember the excitement I felt when a world drop epic appeared from a lowly rock. And thanks for that one, Dan. And now we move on to Discord member Wilson Ma, who says the following. When I first started WoW Classic and I was in Gold Share, I saw some chat about Horde around. I started freaking out because I didn't know that in the Alliance territory I couldn't be attacked unless I attack first. Eventually, someone spotted the Tauren. I ran to him and attacked. Then I hid under a bridge. Then I decided to run and follow him. It felt like an eternity following him down south and west of Goldshire. What seemed like a long distance, I later came to find that it actually wasn't that far at all, only down to Hogger or roundabouts there. But at the time, it seemed so exciting exploring and going somewhere I'd never been. Need I mention that I didn't know you had a map to see where you were? Thank you very much for sharing that one, Wilson Ma. And now we go to another Discord member, Rockmaster, who says this. During the Burning Crusade pre-patch, people were mostly messing around with their honor-bought rank 14 weapons, and it was this time where I found the way to the top of Orgrimmar's Gate. People were doing duels in Durotar as always, when I saw a guy standing on top of the Orgrimmar main gate. I whispered him and asked how he got up there. He jumped down and showed me the way. Left of the main gate, a little bit off to the mountains, there's a path you can take up. You need a mount and some skill in wall jumping to get over certain steep parts, but with enough tries you can eventually make it up to the gate. Once on top, I saw that Orgrimmar itself is not shown from this angle. You only see a flat surface of rocks without anything else visible. I felt like some explorer who finds an unknown land. Standing up there above looking down on the peasants of the Horde felt like a great achievement. Thank you for that one, Rockmaster. We move now on to another Discord member, Palfurus, who says this. During vanilla retail, my guild had a large percentage of couples who were members. This led to benefits such as if one of our best warlocks came on the raid, we were assured her pally husband would be on the roster as well. Or, since our raid leader had a mage as a significant other, we knew that we had her with us for the night, so long as Mr. Raid Leader was out front getting punched in the face. And as we all got to know each other, we got more comfortable using Vent and would often chat as we cleared content, to the point where we knew each other's voices as well. These factors really helped with our overall unit cohesion, as we worked our way through more and more challenging content. While we would almost always make progress, bio breaks would be necessary due to the time investment required to clear endgame content. One night, as we were working our way through Blackwing Lair, our raid leader called for a bio break, with the usual request to issue a /AFK to ensure we knew who was back or still away. Perhaps 2 seconds after he finished his announcement, the very distinctive voice of his significant other came across the channel saying, "AFK for sex. Remember kids, push to talk is your friend." Thanks for that, Palfurus. And now we have another Discord member, Borzen, who says this. I have a fond memory of my really early days of playing vanilla. I was 12 or 13 years old at the time and I was playing a human rogue on the Steamweedle cartel server on EU. I was lucky to get into a guild of very friendly people who showed me the ropes. One of them was a paladin who often offered to boost me through dungeons. I got one of my friends at the time invited to the guild as well. After a couple of weeks, he was kicked from the guild because he was constantly asking for boosts. It was kind of strange to have to explain to him later in real life why he was kicked. Good times. Thank you for that one, Borzen. And now we move on to an email from listener Dysamin, who says this. This is an alpha moment, so it might count. I took a serious interest in high-end raiding during EverQuest Planes of Power. After my raid guild broke up over loot council issues, I turned to the big 3 raid guilds, Afterlife, Fires of Heaven, and Legacy of Steel, each of which were racing for world firsts and documenting it on their websites. Furor Plane Defiler, the leader of Fires of Heaven, was a dramatic, fascinating writer, blogging every night after every raid with pictures, funny guild chat, and loot I could only dream of. When he eventually became the first to down the final god, which everyone knew was coming thanks to his extensive web presence, the boss loot was a plain cloth shirt. That's it. Furor delivered Sony a merciless dissection of the failures in Planes of Power, and it was breathtaking, blistering, and savage. Within days, he started blogging about a new game called World of something or other, and I followed the links, signed up, and lurked on the forums until my golden ticket arrived. There was a streamer who wasn't supposed to, but showed us early Westfall. We watched him kill boars and vultures for hours. It was so gold, so marvelous. Another time, the servers were down and one of us took up a guitar and recorded the World of Warcraft theme music for us to listen to while we continually refreshed the login. I still have it somewhere. And I remember sitting at home launch night, knowing that Best Buy was doing a midnight opening for this, and I couldn't take it. I got the box and ran home to install and play until I had to sleep. Furor Plane Defiler goes by the name Alex Afrasiabi and sits on the stage answering Q&A questions at BlizzCon. He created Plaguelands, Stratholme, and most of my favourite places. The guild leader of Afterlife created Thoughtbot, named after his character Thought. And the guild leader of Legacy of Steel? He calls himself Jeff Kaplan and is Blizzard's vice president, having worked significantly on World of Warcraft and is now running Overwatch. Thank you very much for that, Dysamin. And now we've got one last one, again from Discord member Palfurus. This is a good one, that's why he gets 2 this week. But he says the following. Hey Josh, I wanted to share this remembrance of a fun run through Zul'Gurub back in the day. My guild had run through Zul'Gurub a number of times and pretty much had it on lockdown. Since we were on farm status, we like to pass raid leader responsibilities around to take the load off of our normal raid leader. This particular week, we had our resident Fury Warrior running us through for a change. He was never one to speak on Ventrilo, but he could type as fast as lightning, so between the fact that each of us already knew our jobs and his quick typing, we were making good time all the way up to Hakar. For those who never got to fight Hakar, one of the mechanics was that he would siphon your life off at regular intervals. The best way to counteract the siphon was to kill one of the sons of Hakar, which will release a green cloud of poison that you need to stand in. This will cause Hakar to be poisoned when he attempts to siphon your life away. As the final encounter began, and Hakar was about to start siphoning life, our raid started getting spammed over both /yell and in raid chat by our raid leader, who had macroed, "Get in the poop! Get in the poop!" to indicate that it was time to poison ourselves in the cloud left by the son of Hakar. Well, we nearly wiped due to most of the raid being incapacitated by laughter from this unexpected announcement. We did, however, manage to get ourselves together and rally to take Hakar down. To this day, I will catch myself thinking, "Get in the poop!" and laugh about it. And for that, I want to say thanks to Malibu, the Fury Warrior, wherever he is these days. Thank you for that one, pal Furious. And with all those memories now being done and the memory lane slate being cleared, it's time to do a little bit of cleanup work. And I've just got a couple of final emails for you, just cleaning up a few things that I've touched on in previous episodes. And this first one comes from listener Asmo, who says this. And this was about the Serenity Now funeral gate crashing that I did in the last episode. And Asmo says, "There's an element to this whole thing that you missed. Notoriety. Serenity Now and Gnome Land Security enshrined Phagin into video game history. When you ask me to name WoW players or WoW mages, I'll give you a list of maybe 8 character names, and hers is one of them. Most of us are going to be forgotten once our grandchildren die, if not much sooner than that. Imagine being 90 years old and the longest relationship you have is with the nurse in your care home, who started 6 months ago. You're about to be anonymous dust. Phagin is, but will be remembered for a long time to come. I call her funeral crashing a gift and a tribute, and I'm almost positive she would have agreed." Next, we have another email from listener Dysamin, and this one goes towards the Loot Council issues that I touched on a couple of weeks ago now, and Dysamin says the following. "My raid teams have always used Loot Council. There was also the guy that joined, was allowed to roll on a best-in-slot robe his first week, won, and immediately quit to join a better raid. That still stings. Another team gave a super rare mount to our best healer, who naturally used it once and quit. And doing Firelands, we gave the top DPS caster the quest item for the legendary. He deserved it, but getting all the crap to complete it burned him out, and he too dropped out 3 weeks after he completed it. There is no perfect system, but if your raid is bad, then no loot system will work well. And even if the team is working together for the best, things happen, but less so, and at least you don't hate your raid team. Don't even go there if the raid leader has a girlfriend on the team. Also, I don't think that we'll hear anything about Classic at BlizzCon for another year or 2 or 3, and I doubt Classic will launch tied to Warcraft Battle for Azeroth, because Blizzard doesn't like to cross their marketing. They PR one event at a time. Saying that the sooner Blizzard gets the game out, the sooner they can start taking in money, has little understanding of how Blizzard works. And finally, regarding your mention that Blizzard made the House of Warcraft for players made it a home, and have some rights of ownership to this beloved franchise. No, we are at best squatters in the House of Blizzard, and they can at any time ban us from it for life, make changes, or close it forever. We are squatters. At best, renters. They may listen to our opinions, but they're under no obligation to care what we think or react to it, or obey our demands that a class get nerfed and Classic be as pure as virgin snow. Thank you for that email, Dysamin. And as you can see, everyone, I'm more than happy for people to disagree with me. As long as you've got a great point to come back with, of course I'll read it on the show. And just finally, there is one last email here, just as a bit of cleanup, from listener Wilson Ma again, who wrote me a very lengthy email through the week, but I was so touched to get so much feedback from this person, and they really, really went in depth on how much, A, they were enjoying the show, but also what World of Warcraft meant to them. And I really do appreciate this, Wilson Ma. So I've taken a little bit of your email, about half, and I'm going to read it out for everyone. So just listen to this, everyone. Hi Josh, this is a very lengthy email. I normally don't submit stuff to podcasts, but your podcast is honestly my favorite, so I wanted to participate so that I could truly be a part of it. Thank you, Wilson Ma. That means a lot to me. Anyway, back to the email. I'm looking forward to Classic WoW like you wouldn't believe. I've played every expansion and leveled to max. I did not enjoy the expansions at all. Leveling felt too easy, and I could do everything on my own without any trouble. Granted, I normally level alone because I'm antisocial and it's usually hard to find people, but vanilla did make some things difficult enough where you'd need more people. It gave me more of a need to socialize and reach out to people, where live is the opposite, which I think was discussed in one of your episodes. After listening to your podcast more, it also makes me worried at the expectations that people have. It's been so long since I raided. I don't recall all the requirements, downranking, traditions, phases, things like that. I'm sure it'll all come back, but I'm almost afraid that the community won't be the same. Like you discussed in episode 17, there will be the elitists and private server people and the people that haven't played it before or coming back for the first time in 14 years. I was 15 when I started playing it. I eventually caught on to everything and was a decent paladin, but it takes time, and I'm not sure the community will happily accept the learning curve that it might take. I'm fearful the community is going to be garbage and ruin the vanilla experience for me. I enjoyed playing the game so much. It was incredible working with 39 other people to coordinate transitions, off tanks, healing, dispels, and all that. It's truly incredible to think that 40 people can come together to accomplish that. I hope that I'm wrong and the community is great. Like in episode 18, saying there is a right or wrong answer and people complaining or being rude because you don't have the best gear or the right gear is something that might happen. Regarding no changes, I prefer no changes, but if they did add some, maybe more graveyards so I don't have to run 3 miles when I die. I'll definitely use add-ons for it though, just as I did back in vanilla. So to say no changes seems a bit hypocritical in some cases. Anyway, after that long rant, I love your podcast and look forward to listening to it every day. I have a movie podcast myself, Rad Notions. It's a movie review and a fantasy film league podcast. If you ever feel like mentioning it, that'd be great. And to you, I say this, Wilson Ma. Absolutely. That was a very, very thoughtful, insightful email that you wrote me, and I appreciate your kind words, and I thank you so much for taking the time to write that to me. And if you take the time to write that to me, then I will happily shout out your podcast. Everyone, check out Rad Notions for a movie podcast and to get your fix of what Wilson Ma has to say on all things movies. Thank you very much again for that email. And now it's time for just a few quick shout outs. We got one from listener Borzen who says the following in the Discord. Could I be a cheeky bastard and ask for a shout out? Simply for the bragging rights towards my girlfriend Felicia. I can tell her that she's sleeping with someone who's been internet famous for 2 whole seconds. And I'll say this, absolutely Borzen, more than happy to throw you and Felicia a shout out. I hope the two of you are doing well. Felicia, you're absolutely now certainly sleeping with someone who is internet famous, so take that as you may. And I just want to shout out a few more people who called in this week and spoke with the show, which you'll actually hear on the Wednesday episode. The Double P, Def Camp and Melderon, and Minoru, a big thank you to you guys for calling in. Also to Tarocco, who sat down for a very in-depth tanking interview with me, which is coming out in about a month. And I'm very, very backed up with interviews now, everyone. So thank you so much to everyone who's gotten back to me, but I'm going to put the pause button on taking interviews for about a month or so because I've got so many, which is fantastic. I've got about 6 or 7 already done, which is just beyond my wildest dreams, and I can't wait to push them all out to you. But unfortunately, a few people who have done interviews will have to wait a little while until they get published, but most of them are said, or all of them are said. That's cool by them, so that's fantastic. And I also want to thank our mystery interviewee for this Wednesday. Now, I had a late pullout on the show, and this person was luckily available, and they happily slotted themselves in, and we sat down over the weekend and had an amazing chat. They absolutely blew me away with their knowledge of the game and classes in particular, as the majority of the interview is about classes. And I really think all of you are going to love this one. I still won't say who it is just for reasons. Some of you have guessed who it is, and you might know why I'm keeping the info a little tight to the chest just for now. But on Wednesday morning, all will be revealed. It's a phenomenal interview, so please do keep an ear out for that one. I also want to shout out to King Mike. Thank you so much for the walkthrough that you gave me through the role-playing realm over the weekend. Now everyone, you can watch this. There's a VOD on my Twitch channel, Countdown to Classic. If you simply jump on Twitch, look for the video that says first time role-playing or something like that, have a watch. It's actually really funny. I got about an hour walk through the Moonguard role-playing realm. I didn't know anything about it or what to expect. It was my first time ever trying role-playing or mucking around in that world. We had a lot of fun. It's actually quite funny. So if you know what happens in Goldshare on the Moonguard server, then you probably know what kind of comedy came up. So go and check it out. Anyway, that's about it for the week. I just want to remind you all to please call into the show if you can. As I said, on the weekends, 6:30 p.m. Friday and Saturday nights onwards, or if you're in Europe, from about 10 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon every day, I can do it. Just PM me on Discord or email me and let me know. And I also need memory lane submissions now that I've cleaned them all out. Get in touch with me, everyone. Please, if you want a shout out or something, say hello. Anyway, that's been it. That's been an epic episode. I'll see you all on Wednesday. Thank you so much for lasting this long. Bye-bye.